All right, welcome back. We are MDEV1004, that's Mobile APIs and Frameworks, in the summer 2023 semester at Georgian, and it's week 12, part 1 of our broadcast and recording. This is an odd day because normally we meet in the morning, but not today. Stuff happens, as we say, and so today I'm broadcasting at 9:30 at night. But let's move on from there and talk about what we're going to be doing this week and what I need you guys to do. And I think it's pretty exciting because, as you'll see, it's pretty interesting. Payment gateways, which is the topic of this week. So we're sitting at week 12. Again, it's an intro to payment gateways this week with an intro to Stripe specifically. ICE 10 is what's happening this week. Last week when we got together, we were working on a UI for authentication. I shared with you an authentication controller and authentication views for iOS, and the hope was that you were going to do something like that for Android. We also talked about how to incorporate JWT into our API, and we did a little bit of refactoring. I also released the deadline or the due date for assignment 4, but as yet, we're going to talk about the details. We did talk about them briefly last week. We'll talk about them more again coming up. This week, we're going to be talking about what the heck are payment gateways, if you don't know, and an intro to Stripe. ICE 10 is due week 12. That's this week. This Sunday at midnight is normal. Well, without further ado, let's talk about payment gateways. What are they? So really, when we think about this, it's a way of making this secure online transaction happen. Again, usually between someone who's selling something and someone who's going to buy something. The really exciting thing is that this technology has come a huge way, long way, since I started out way back in the day. It was really difficult to make an e-commerce store back then, for a couple of reasons. One, it was difficult to be secure. Two, it was weird to put together the views. And we kept on making those same views over and over again. So we're going to be talking about a few different kinds of gateways today. Stripe, something about PayPal and Braintree, and maybe some others. But we're going to really focus on Stripe today. So let's think about usage and how we're going to do this thing. So we use them in web apps, and typically what we do is we have an API backend. On the front end, it's typical for us to run things like React or Angular, okay, especially nowadays. And what happens is the API backend, it still has to communicate nicely with Stripe or whatever the front end, or whatever the payment gateway that you're going to use. We're going to use Stripe as an example over the next 2 weeks. So here's an example of our Stripe controller that we're going to integrate today. I'm going to talk about this. It's already been done, but I wanted to show you it. And really what we do here is, we have a backend, an API, and what it does is it creates an intent. Interesting, the word intent, similar to what we do with Android. But what we're doing with Stripe is it connects to your dashboard on the back end. So one of the things you're going to have to do this week is you need to set up your account for Stripe in order for you to do ICE 10. Okay, it's important to do that. There are some steps involved that I can't be part of, so you might as well pause the video and get it done now. Right? So that's what I recommend you do. It's not that difficult. You do have to give some information, banking information, if you want to make this work. You have to give information about who you are. Okay, so that's part of it. And this is why this is one of the weeks that I recommend. If you're going to skip a week of not doing an in-class exercise, this might be that. It might be difficult for you to do this kind of stuff. However, I might say difficult in terms of you have to give your banking information. You have to give information about you. You have to kind of create a small little example of, kind of a business name and that kind of thing. You have to select whether you're going to do a sole proprietorship, like a little business, or not, right? Again, you never have to do any transactions, and they're not going to charge you anything until you actually do a transaction. So don't worry about that kind of thing. but you do have to have some kind of way of connecting and setting it up. So while we're talking, please go up online on Stripe, set up your account. So this is how it looks. So basically what happens is the backend, the API, will talk to Stripe, and it will authenticate with an API key. When it authenticates with the API key, Stripe is going to give it back basically, responses saying, yes, you're good. It will process the entire payment on its own. And not only that, but it'll also produce a user interface for you right out of the box, both on web, iOS, and Android. So this is where Stripe is awesome. Okay, and we're talking about payment gateways. So here's an example of what it would look like if we were going to make something, a controller for an API. And we're going to use this exact type of controller here, which I've already put together for you guys so you can look at. So what about on the front end? What does it look like on mobile apps? Again, we use a mobile app, but we must still have an API on the back end. The API is a thing that we need to connect to. So this entire semester, we've been talking about APIs, how to connect to them. And here's an example of how we're going to be connecting to it with an iOS app. Your job today, as normal, is to make the Android version. Okay, so let's talk about the iOS version first and how this works. So pretty much what happens is it reads the JSON data that comes from the API backend. Your custom API acts as an intermediary, your API, with your iOS application, as well as with Stripe. So that's what happens. Now you have a lot of control in this way. Does it have to happen exactly like this? Absolutely not. There's a lot of different ways that Stripe allows you to connect, and not just Stripe, but all the other payment gateways. Some of them with absolutely no code at all. Okay, which is really beautiful for people who want to get their store up and running as fast as possible. But here, of course, we're going to make something. We're actually going to code some stuff. And here's an example of what I put together. And I'll talk about all this when we get to the coding part later on. All right, some common uses. Let's talk about some common uses for payment gateways. E-commerce stores is a common use. Subscription services, which is kind of neat. If you want to subscribe to something that you have a regular payment that you're going to make, Stripe will take care of it, right? As an example. We're going to talk about that later on. Not just Stripe, but also PayPal. A lot of them will actually do the same kind of thing. They'll subscribe. They'll allow you to subscribe and pay on a regular basis, or have your clients, the people that are buying services from you or whatever, pay regularly. Now, this might be interesting to you if you're making an app this semester for your final project for the second semester, where you have an app that you're expecting clients that they're going to subscribe to, some kind of in-app purchase or something like that. This is why we would use some kind of payment gateway as well. Let's do some comparisons. So big ones, like we talked about, we've been talking about Stripe this whole time. Stripe, which is easy to use, I feel, and to integrate into your stuff. There are transaction fees. You need to pay some kind of transaction fee per transaction. Again, they're not extensive, but they are there because they got to make some money. PayPal, again, is another popular one. Huge user base, very popular out there. And they have a different perspective on how to do things. They don't use necessarily credit cards, but you set up your account. So basically different merchants and buyers, they set themselves up and then they kind of connect. And PayPal works as an intermediary between them. So there's some pre-setup for both sides, right? Braintree, really great for mobile apps. If you want to make a very simple interface, Braintree is your friend. Square, huge for small to medium-sized businesses because it has both an online presence and you'll see these Square apps running on a device when you go to a restaurant or when you're actually at a merchant. So you can slide in or do some kind of Apple Pay in person where they allow this stuff to happen as well. And the big one, of course, is Authorize.net. It's been around forever. And again, it's a Visa solution, but it does e-commerce for businesses and in various industries everywhere. Okay, so these are the some of the most common ones. Let's talk about Stripe. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because of its ease of use. Okay, so here's the website. Of course, it's Stripe. And one thing that we want to do with Stripe is it does all the payment processing for you. So one of the challenges we had way back in the day is like, how do you manage credit cards? How do you manage all that information? Here is what Stripe has removed. You never need to store any credit card information on your local server, which is great. On the app, which is great. You don't do anything. You can do single transactions where the customer doesn't even have to sign up. As long as they have a credit card and they want to pay you, you can do everything. Now, obviously, it behooves you to get information from them, their billing information, their address information, and Stripe allows you to do all that as well. It actually creates a customer object that if you want to, you can register the customer, and if it's a returning customer, it'll pull all that information up for you, which is kind of really cool. So all that heavy lifting, customer feedback and all that stuff, it'll take care of all of that for you, again, for a fee, okay? But the great thing is it has a bunch of different payment options, credit cards, debit, Canadian debit, so all the major credit card players, now again, using credit cards, it can be more of a transaction cost than anything else because they vary in terms of what you're using here. Apple Pay, Google Pay, anything you want, it's pretty much available for you. And you configure it on your dashboard on the back end, which is really great. Okay, so that's why it's easy kind of to set up. Subscription management we talked about before. Again, this flexible billing interval thing is what I always liked about it. If you want to set up a subscription service, maybe you have something that you're going to set up. You're building an app, like, for example, or some kind of calorie counting app, and you want to unlock different parts of the services where you do more advanced analysis and that kind of stuff for your customer, and they're going to pay you a small fee, $1 a month, $2 a month, or $10 a month. Here's an example of a subscription service where, Stripe will take care of it for you. It'll take a bit of a fee from you, from all your clients, and then slowly, you can do that kind of billing, and it'll trickle down on a monthly billing cycle for you, for your app. Very, very simple to set up, and they can cancel at any time. It's really, really great. They also have something really great called, which is why I like Stripe as well, because they have something called Radar Fraud Prevention. It's their own built-in system that they've done a lot of work with machine learning to prevent fraud for someone stealing someone else's card or kind of impersonating another person or anything like that. It's pretty secure. Overall, it's kind of like a turnkey operation where you can do everything kind of in one place, which is really great. The thing I love about it the most, which you're going to see now, is that it's really developer friendly. I mean, they have everything that you can possibly think of from to get started. The documentation for Stripe is extensive, and so on. And it's not that difficult to get going if you know where to look. The challenge is if you don't know where to look. One thing that's happened with Stripe, and we're going to talk about this, is that things have evolved. So if you took some old code from, let's say, even something as old as 2020, it may not work for you, because Stripe has moved along. They've realized that they don't want you to send credit card information directly to them. They want you to use their structures. We're going to talk about these structures in a second, and there's many of them. Now, for this week, we have some goals. Okay, we can't do it all. There's no way. There's just so much to do with Stripe. And we're going to do Stripe again next week. That's why we're going to set this up. So first, again, number one, stop the video. Go sign up for Stripe right now in order for you to do this in-class exercise. All right. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to create a simple Stripe API right on the back end first. We're going to talk about that, and I'll show you how it works. Okay. Now, I've just used our regular API, stripped it down. It still has that movie stuff in there, but we're not using it. But what if it wasn't movie stuff? What if it was books that you're selling? What if it was artwork? What if it was computers? What if it was something that you were selling? The database, you still have to connect somehow to a database online. And of course, you'd have to have your API working somewhere online that it can connect with. Okay, but we'll talk about how to do this with iOS right now. So then after we do this, after we create a simple Stripe API, we're going to do this in a second. I'll talk about it, how to do it, and I'll look at the documentation with you. Then we'll look at how to create an iOS UI. I've provided a sample for you to take a look at. and it comes right from the Stripe documentation. I've literally just captured that part, that little view controller, and attached it to our kind of iOS app, and then you can see how it all kind of looks nice and fits together. And I'll talk about like what it does for you, which is really awesome. I'll demonstrate it for you. Things for you to do again. Okay, so this is only worth half of the marks, just doing this kind of stuff. The other part is you need to do it on Android. And like I said, the Android part, just as easy as it is on the iOS side. You could use ChatGPT again, but you're going to find that the Stripe documentation is pretty extensive. So you're not going to have to worry too much. Again, what I want you guys to do is I need you to demonstrate both iOS and Android for you to get full marks in your little video that you're going to make. All right, so that's the intro. That's what we're doing. Let's get to it. So first of all, let's take a look at, so I'm here on my Mac Studio, and I want to talk about, the API and what it looks like. A couple of things that have changed for us to do. So if you're watching this video, again, what you probably want to do is you want to start with a fresh API if you want to try it out yourself. It's not a matter of just copying and pasting my code. So again, what I've done is I've used the Georgian College Express MVC. So what I did was I basically did a npm install at Georgian College / express -mvc -g, and that installed the Express MVC that I built, the little npm module. Okay, what this allowed us to do is create a brand new project so it doesn't corrupt the stuff that you've already done. Basically what I did was I just said something like Express, and then if I said Express MVC and then -- help, you can see that it's going to give you some instructions on how to do that, how to set it up, right? And what it does is you give a few options and then you give it a folder. So in my case, what I did was I was on the outside folder in ISIS, like I am right now, and I kind of did something like this. I said, okay, let's use Express MVC. And then what I did was I said --API --TSC, no auth. I'm not using authentication right now. Right, and then I specified the folder, which was, MDEV1004 in the M2023 semester, and it's ICE 10. Notice that ICE 10 starts with the API first. Last week we did ICE 9 with the iOS side. It's the opposite this time around. So once you've done that, it'll scaffold it out. You need to do a yarn install to get this things going and everything else. Remember, it does need a MongoDB back end. So I've got MongoDB here running in the background. There's my little server. Again, the way you would run this is different ways. You can do it on iOS, but we've done this before, so by now you should know what to do. But typically what I do is I just run mongod and then I say --db path equals to /data/db, and it kind of launches this thing. I do it with sudo permissions, so administrative permissions, so there's no issues, and it runs nicely in the background. Okay, that's just to make sure your MongoDB is working. Now, do you need it? No, you don't really need this thing. So if you ran it without a database, or if you remove the database components for today, it's fine, but we might need it next week. Let's see how it goes. Next, some things you have to add. Let's talk about that. So back to our package.json. I want to talk about this a little bit with you. So things that I added, so you understand, is I added something new, .env. This is new. And what we did was we added the dots. What we want to do is allow ourselves to have a environment variable that we can save locally, and then we can also copy to render later. That's what we want to do. So .env npm module allows that for us to do that kind of stuff. And it's something that we've been kind of pushing off. We've been talking about using environment variables for a bit. You probably already used them on render, which is good. But here is an example of what you can do locally. Okay. The other thing we added in is not just .env, but we also added. I don't really need moments. I had that in, but I've kind of added it, but I was going to use it for date and timestamps. I've kind of removed that. I don't think it's really necessary, but it's there. But the other one you just need is stripe. That's it. Those two. So you just need .env and stripe. Those are the main things that have changed. Once you have those two configured, notice the dev dependencies aren't required because .env and sprite, right, both have stripe both have built-in d.ts files, or basically documentation for TypeScript. You don't need to add any dev dependencies at all. It's already built in, which is really great again. So that's the first thing. So first, what you do is you take your package.json, add this in, and then do a yarn install. And what this would do is take care of it. Let me remove the moment. I don't really need it. And so I'll do that here. So I'll just go in here and I'll say something like, let's go into that here. And I'll say ICE 10. There we go. And I'll just do yarn remove moment, which you don't need. And I'll also remove moments dash range. Okay, and it should remove everything. You can see those packages are not removed because we don't need them. And it makes it lighter. I'm just going to kind of update that. Git add dot, git commit -m, and I'll say updated package.json. Awesome. Okay, so you don't have that anymore either. If you're watching this video, you don't need it. So that's what you do. You add those two things, just stripe and .env. Now, why do we need .env and how do you set it up? Well, what you can do is outside of the server folder, you can put a .env file. Great little file to put in. And what this does, again, I'm showing you some of my API keys. You won't see the whole thing. But basically what it is you can see that there are two secrets that you want to set up. One of them is called stripe secret key with an equal sign, and then you're going to get this test key. Well, you're going to use test keys today, okay? And I'll show you where those are. And also the stripe publishable key. You need both of those keys to make this thing work, and you're going to kind of put them in here. What you need to do is in our .gitignore file, make sure that your .env file is mentioned in the .gitignore file along with your node modules. All right, so this way, if you put it up on GitHub, these APIs won't even go up there. And the great thing is you can copy directly, actually you can upload the .env file to render, and it'll just take that information and it'll add it in to the render.com environment variables, which is pretty cool. Okay, so that's what you need there. So that gives us our API keys that we're going to use. In order for us to initialize that, we need to go into our config folder, into our app.ts folder, and in here we're just going to import our .env and then /config. Okay, so what this does, don't forget to transpile. What this is going to do is it's not only going to insert the .env module, right? Notice that there isn't a name. We're just actually activating the module and running it immediately with the config. We're running the config function right away. And what this does is it makes it so that your program, your node modules, knows where those process.environment. Whatever you want to call it are located. So that's the first thing, okay? So you need to do this. Part two. So once you've done that, then what you need to do is I've set up a little configuration for Stripe, and it literally just does this. So stripe.ts, which is in the config, it's the Stripe config, and the Stripe config has two things, the secret key as well as the publishable key. And both of those two things, notice it's using the process.env in the .env file, right? And then we use the same macro, which is stripe secret key. That's the environment variable. And we're going to cast it as a string, both that and the stripe publishable key, so there's no errors. That's what kind of takes the errors away. So that's the first thing. And that is your stripe.ts commit. Okay, this is where you would commit. Once you've got this stripe.ts, right, and again, you can pause the video for this, right, the next part that you want to do is think about the controller. So I'm going to go into my controller, and I'm going to go into my stripe.ts controller. Okay. And I want to talk about where I got this stuff from, because this isn't something that I came up with or made up out of my mind, right? It literally came from the documentation that's up online. So first, again, here's my dashboard. This is what it looks like. I'm going to come back to this in a second. But one thing is, it comes up with these developer tools or docs. And the way you can get the docs is if you go to Help, and if you scroll down to where it says Developer Docs in your dashboard, once you signed up for Stripe, so please, if you haven't done that, please pause that video now and go back and do it now, right? That's the first thing. And then it's going to take you to these developer docs. On the left, you can see that there's some developer tools that you can select. For example, you can use the Stripe CLI or the Stripe Shell if you really want to. You can make a whole app up on Stripe itself if you like as well, right? And it also talks about how to get started with an API. It does a lot of little talking about it, and it discusses how to put this together, and so on, and how to store your API keys and all that kind of stuff. And it gives you some example of like 3 different types of API keys, right, in the test side: a secret, a publisher one, and a restrictable API key. The restricted API key, again, a lot of times we want to use it in microservices. We haven't made a microservice this semester. We're actually doing an API that's kind of a monolithic API that does everything. A great thing to put together, we've talked about this, is a microservice where it kind of compartmentalizes. It makes it more and more of a modular approach to creating an API. Again, little out of scope for our course this semester, but it's something that we can use, and it's restricted keys for that purpose. Okay, so that is kind of where we go through. They also talk about, if you actually read through this, development environment, how you work. I'm using Node.js, but you can see that there's different backends that you can choose. .NET is one of them, very popular backend for using Stripe. Here, what they talk about is how you can install the Stripe CLI. We don't need to do this, okay? This is just if you want to install the Stripe CLI, and we wanted to connect to Stripe and create a Stripe app, software as a service, which is not what we're doing, okay? But here you can see that they also have a go live checklist, what you need, and so on. And there's lots of documentation here for this. I'm going to skip this part and go to what we need. And if I go back, I'm going to scroll this down. So I go to SDKs, and what I want to do is I want to take a look at iOS SDK. So this is the first thing. So you can see the iOS SDK has an image of iOS. Nice. And there's some options. One of them is mobile payment element, which is one of the options. Okay. And it says recommended. So this is what I've done. I've used the mobile payment element. Okay. There's also other things here. All of these things, these elements, are pre-built user interfaces that make your API look fantastic across iOS, Android, or the web. And what they do is they connect to Stripe. Stripe will actually build out or generate that user interface for you, that element that allows you to put in the credit card information, all that kind of stuff. There's different pieces to it. We'll talk about it in a second. So what I want is to click this little card here, and it's going to take me to this right here. You can see that accepting a payment, whether it's iOS or whether it's Android, they look, for the most part, identical. And this is the kind of thing that you're going to expect to get. This is what it's going to generate for you. A little pop-up that comes up that's going to show you everything that you need. Very, very nice. You can also, if you don't want the payment intent, that's what this thing is, you can also choose just for a card element only, which will only give you that one little piece that allows you to put in your credit card information if you want to host everything else. Lots of flexibility here in terms of the way this works. All right, so here back to iOS, we want to go into mobile payment element, and I'm going to scroll down now. So the first thing is you set up Stripe. And so this is your NPM install. I just said we've already done this. We're using Yarn instead of NPM. You can see that Node is the backend that we're using. Okay, so we've already done this stuff. Now, options for setting stuff up on iOS. One is, we want to set up the iOS stuff with Swift Package Manager. Let's go back to our backend for a second. And I want to show you what that looks like. So here we are with Xcode. And one thing to note is in Xcode, You can see the package dependencies have been listed here, right, that I put in. How did I get them? In the past, Cocoa Pods was the only thing we could use, really, for the most part. But there's other ones as well, but Cocoa Pods is very popular. Today, I avoid Cocoa Pods like the plague. I don't want to use Cocoa Pods. I want to use the Swift Package Manager. So the way this works is you're going to go to File, and you're going to go to Add Package. And what you want to do is you want to put up the kind of the link that you're going to get from the site. So if you go back to here, you can see it gives you this little link here, right? This GitHub link right here. I'm just going to copy this link. I'm going to go back into my iOS, and here where it says search or enter a package URL, I'm going to put that in here. I'm going to paste that in, right? And as soon as I do that, you can see that the Stripe iOS SPM is there. If you follow the packages, it'll give you a list of packages. Now, I've included all of them, but you don't need them all. The only one you really need is the Stripe payment sheet. Okay. However, I've put them all in because next week maybe we'll do more with this, and I don't want to kind of install the package again. And but at the end of the day, it's not that huge. Okay, so it's pretty good. So that's where you find it. You install it. You add their packages. You select all of these, the ones that you see here in the video, and then you're good to go. And that's how you add the dependencies for Stripe directly into your iOS app. It's literally just a package manager for iOS. It's fantastic, and this is what we're going to do. All right, let's continue. So that's the first part. Next part, right, is if you follow through, it says on the bottom, you can enable payment methods. Okay, so this is on your dashboard now. Let's talk about the dashboard a little bit. So you set up your dashboard, you've logged in, you've made your stuff. There's two modes that you can operate in. One of them is live mode, which is right here. And the other one is test mode, which is the one I've been using. All right. For this week, for ICE 10, test mode is enough. Okay, you don't need to do anything more. Now you can see there's some that failed and some that succeeded because I was playing around with the API today to make it all work. Okay. And again, when you think about how to do this, there's a couple things. One, you get a set of example API keys here, test API keys. One of them is the publishable key that you can see here. The other one is the secret key. And I took those two keys, copy paste them into the environment variables that we saw earlier, right? Here, there's also an opportunity for us to do webhooks, where I might do that next week. What webhooks will allow us to do is when the payment is finally done, Stripe will notify your API backend that it's been done, and then you know that you've been paid, which is pretty cool, right? There's also events and logs and apps, and there's also more. And so what it's actually asking you to do is something else. Let's go back and talk about how this is done and everything else. So if you look back here, it says payment method settings. If you click on payment method settings, it's going to take you back to your dashboard. And here you can see it's a direct link to your own dashboard. And here you can see that I'm accepting all these cards. So that's popular cards like Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, all the big ones, right? And then it's just one link for that. I've just turned that on. You can turn it off if you want, if you don't want to accept those. I've turned off Bancaire, the one from in France. I don't really care to use that right now, so I've turned it off, right? And Alipay, I've turned off, popular in China, like it says. I mean, again, if I had a lot of customers in China, probably behoove me to turn this on, right? WeChat Pay, also I turned that off. And Link, also turned that off. The ones I left on were Apple Pay and Google Pay. So Apple Pay and Google Pay is also another option for you, for your customers to pay right inside of your app. So those are the options that you have in here. And you can see here that from bank redirects, some of them are on. And down in here at the bottom, you can see that there's other methods that you can pay as well. For example, things like Affirm, if you're going to make a regular payment, as an example, to Apple, Affirm does that for you, and so on. And there's also this one, which is Canadian pre-authorized debits, which you can turn on as well. So lots and lots of different payment methods you can turn on. You can see here I've just turned some of them off. For our example, I've just made, kind of the most popular, I've turned the most popular things on, right? Like, for example, Apple Pay and Google Pay, and I left these as defaults that were turned on for me, okay? So that's what that is, and that's what it's talking about here when it says payment method settings. You have to do that prior to doing any of this stuff. You have to turn it on, or else whatever's going to appear in your element that you're going to get that's going to be fed to you from Stripe is only going to be the stuff you've turned on, right? And maybe too much stuff if you don't want it. All right, so that's like number 2. Next, the server side. Okay, this is where we're going to actually add a payment intent, which is on the API side. And one thing that it does is it gives us a little bit of sample code. So there's a sample code that it gave me. Now I modified this sample code. This is kind of where you start off. And what I did was I made our own sample code that I can show you here. All right. So what I did, incorporating it back into our backend, like I said, is I made a little controller called the Stripe controller. Okay, this is back on our API now. And what I did is I took their example code and I modified it a little bit just to reduce some of the noise so that we can make things work. A couple of things you need to do here. You need to import the config for Stripe. So this is where you get the environment variables from. That's where those come from. Okay, so config, remember in the Stripe configuration file, we get the Stripe secret key and Stripe publishable key that you would have pasted in from your dashboard. And I'm using the test keys. I'm not using the live keys here. And you'll see why in a sec. Next, I'm going to go back to here. So that's the first thing. Next is you need to import the Stripe module. So this connects you to Stripe itself. This is all the work that you have to do on the back end to do the connection. And the first thing we do is create that connection. That's what this one does right here. So when we instantiate an object of Stripe, we pass in the config key. The secret key connects us. It's the API key that's going to connect us to the back end. That's what it does. We also must mention, for TypeScript only, the API version. 2022-11.15 is the latest API version for Stripe. Okay. And then finally, we create our function that we're going to export. I called it create payment intent because that's kind of what it is. I gave it a request, response, and next function just like normal. And here, although I'm not using it, I created a customer. That's what I've done, as well as a customer ID. So I'm capturing these things. Customer, what it does, it creates, if it doesn't exist, it creates it for you. But you can also come back. Do you have a customer that's coming back? You can use this same customer ID if you want to have a customer list. And that customer ID is something that you can create where you have a database of customer IDs. So when they come back in, they can kind of log in. You know what the customer ID is, and you can use that customer ID, which identifies past purchases, history, analytics, a bunch of stuff, which is really great. Here, I've preset the amount, okay, because this is just an example. So this is the amount, 999. Realistically, what you want to do is with this function, you carry forward the amount from the front end to this part right here, where you can set up whatever that number is. This is in cents, okay? So it's not $999. It's 999 cents, right? Which means $9.99. Canadian. I've specified the currency here as well. I've also set up the customer ID, and then I also set up automatic payment methods to true, but you can set up only the payment methods that you want. Even if you set up a bunch of payment methods, as an example, let's say you want to have only cards show up, but none of the other ones, you can totally do that. Just have credit cards. And so you can have a lot of control here on the back end of what you want to do. So what we're doing here is we are configuring and creating something called a payment intent. The payment intent is an element. It's an element that's been generated by Stripe that you're doing right here. You're instantiating this element. Okay, whenever you go to this create payment intent controller, the logic behind the route, right? And what this is going to do, it's going to instantiate this object. We're going to store it in the payment intent as a payment intent variable. And here, all I'm doing is, if everything is successful, now things may not go successful, and you can test to see if things are an error, okay, if something went wrong. But if everything went well, then the back end, all it's going to do, it's going to fire off a couple of pieces of information. One, do we have success? The other one is maybe a little message says payment intent created. Okay, so we know it's happening. We need a couple of things that are super important. We need to pass in the client secret. So the client secret is kind of like that one-time ID that represents the client information, your customer. Okay. We also can pass in the customer ID. I do this, but it's not going to be valuable because I'm going to ignore it. The way I've done it for iOS is I made it so it's a one-time purchase. They're not saving their information. They're just gonna buy something and they're gonna put their credit card in, and that's all you need. Very simple transaction, right? I'm also sending back the publishable key. So you need both the publishable key as well as the secret key. The secret key talks to Stripe. The publishable key goes to your iOS application, and your iOS application uses that as an API key to talk to your backend. Pretty cool. All right, and through your backend to Stripe. So that is the API. It's pretty simple, and that's your controller. What you want to do now is put together the route. So here's your route, and all I've done is I've kept all the other routes there before. I imported the create payment intent from the Stripe controllers, and down at the bottom here you can see that we have a post request that we're going to do. The post request is going to go to an API, to a URI called payment. Okay, so it's going to be API/payment is where you're going to go, right? And then you're going to use the create payment intent. And the create payment intent is actually going to generate everything that you're going to need on the front end, which is your iOS application. Okay, so set all that up now. Pause the video in order for you to get this done, and so that you have everything done, that you don't have to worry about this stuff later on. Test it. And one way that you can test it is to use Postman. So here's how you use Postman. So here's Postman, but what you need to do is you have to run your back end. So let's go back, and I'm just going to run my back end so I can show you what this looks like. So I'm going to go here and just type in TSC -W to start off the transpilation process. That's what this does. And then, just like you've seen before, I'm just going to run nodemon, right? Now remember, when I run nodemon, I need to have MongoDB active here, right? And I want to try to make this work with Postman first. Let's run Postman. Postman, I'm going to go to HTTP localhost 3000 API payment. I'm not going to put anything in the body, right? So the body part has nothing in there. And all I need to do to test this out, if everything works well, is I'm going to click send. What it's going to do is it's going to give you some information here. So success is true. This is an example of how it worked, right? The message is the payment intent created. Here's the client secret that you would get. Again, this is regenerated every time you do this, right? The customer ID, here's the customer ID itself, as well as the publishable key that you're going to send back into your front end. Okay, that's what happens here. So that is your an example of how to use Postman to test that things are going well. So at the same time, you can also monitor this stuff on the dashboard side. So if you go to the dashboard here, I'm just going to go to my home, and then you can see that if I click on test mode, again, you can take a look at, stuff that is being paid and so on. And it talks about how things would work and the type of volume, the balance, right? And so on, that I've been using. And it looks like I'm going to have to pay $10 because my gross volume is $9.99. All right. Not worried about it. But if you look here, so back to me, right? And if I go back to developers, here's my developer portal. You can see that these are some of the transactions that I made on test mode only. And you can see that this one that I just made just succeeded. So if I click on this little 25 here and I go there, I can actually go to the last intent that I made. And you can see here at 10:14 just now, that is my little intent. It talks about the payment intent, the amount, and so on. And you can see that this is all the stuff that's happened, right? And it gives you the entire list, entire object. And so just to see what's happening, you can also see the post body, what it comes with, and that, the kind of stuff that we looked at. You can also cross-reference the customer ID with what you got on the Postman side. So see it ends in FRR. You go back to Postman, right, as an example. Let's actually do the real Postman, not this one. Let's just do this one. FRR, you can see that is going to be the customer ID right here. and it kind of jives with what we're getting from the dashboard. All right, so this is kind of a good example of how things work. And if it failed, and I've showed you how that I had some failures as well, if I go load more, you can see that when I was doing testing earlier, I wanted to always test to see if it failed. So you can actually look through here. If I go to back, if I kind of back up here a little bit, and if I click on failed, let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so here's an example of me trying to make it fail by sending the card information to the back end. I did this earlier today, to try and show you what this looked like. And it's basically, look, invalid request error. This is where, Stripe is basically saying, look, we're not going to take your information. If you really want this, we can do it if you want. If you really want to be explicit and give me the credit card information and send it to me, you can. I don't recommend you do it. That's what this is saying. And if you do, there's all kinds of stuff that's involved. Like you have to validate yourself. They don't recommend it at all. It's not recommended to take any of this information. Great thing about Stripe is they give you a bunch of credit cards to test with, right? So you don't have to do any of the heavy lifting yourself. Okay, let's go back to take a look at this. So this is the Postman, so we know it works properly. We've got this working. You can see that we have a post request with an API payment. That's all okay. That's 200. And now we want to make it so that it works in the front end. Back to our documentation. All right, so this is great. We've got this back end. We did the back end stuff, and I'm going to scroll down now, and we're going to start collecting payment details. There are two ways you can do this with in your user interface. One is with UIKit. The other one was with UI. I'm using UIKit today because we've been using UIKit this entire semester. And it'll be easier for you to do this compared to if you do it with Android. Android side is closer to the UIKit side. All right, so then it gives us kind of a structure. And I've taken most of this just as is, and I've included it, most of it, all right? And again, you can see that it imports Stripe payment sheets, which is what we want, Stripe payment sheet. And then it does in the view did load, it kind of has this built-in function. One of them is it kind of turns off the checkout button, kind of disables it until it has a communication nicely and it's ready. So it's ready to make your transaction with the backend. Okay, that's what it does. So it kind of doesn't allow you to check out until it makes that connection. When it's made the connection and everything is good, then the backend, then the button is enabled again. All right, so by default, we disable the checkout button. That's what's happening here, okay? Next, what we're going to see is that you're going to see a post request. Let me show you the actual code now. So that was where it came from. Let's take a look at what we did with Xcode. And you can see that in the view controller, I did the exact same thing. Except I created a little function called fetch payment intent, which encapsulated all that stuff we just saw. So how does this work? We're going to use a backend. So what does the backend look like? Well, here's something interesting. You'd be forgiven to think that you couldn't do a localhost 3000 with your iOS application, but actually you can. Because remember, we're making it a simulator, and so you can test it all locally. Your API as well as your iOS application can be tested locally just like this. So you can say localhost 3000 API payment. That is the backend checkout URL that we're going to use in this case. And we're using the fetch payment intent. Fetch payment intent. Here we instantiate an object of type request with the backend checkout URL as the URL in question. Here we're configuring the request as a post type request, and we're setting up our task. So we're actually making our request. So this is configuring the request like we did last week, and this is issuing the request right here this week. All right, and we're going to set up a data object. The data object is something that we're going to get back from the request, okay? And in the data object, this is our response, right? In the response, we're getting a data object, and we're going to serialize it as a JSON object. So remember, it's not going to be an array. It's going to be these curly braces we're going to get back as a JSON object. We're sending it from the API, right? And then once we're doing that, all we care about, there's a lot of other noise, messages and other stuff, but all we care about is really the client secret, right? And the publishable key. We store those two objects here, and then if there's some kind of error, we can handle errors. We're not doing that right here. We're leaving this alone. Again, this is right from the API documentation. Next, we're going to use the Stripe API client, and we're going to use the shared publishable key. right? And we're going to say that that is equal to the publish role queue. This is just configuration steps again. Next, we're going to create and configure a payment sheet. Now, this is that custom element that I talked about. That thing that's going to be generated for you. Nothing for you to do, right? And you're going to see how simple this is, right? And here I've just used a merchant display name. I made one up, Acrotech, as in Acrotech Computer Services. And then here, our configuration. One thing is, by default, you get US, and I wanted to use Canada. So this is where I did some modifications. I use the default billing details address country as CA, Canada. So that only Canada comes up first because we're in Canada, right? I'm hoping that most of our clients are going to be here, at least for now. Also, allows delayed payment methods. Yes, it's true. And that means if you want to go, and we have to go to your banking site to okay the fact that you're good, and you have to sign into your bank before you come back here. It allows you to do that. And then finally, I'm going to instantiate an object of type payment sheet. And what payment sheet is going to be is there's two parts. We're going to pass in the client secret and this configuration we just did right here to instantiate this payment sheet. It's generating the payment sheet for us. Remember, on iOS with Swift, there is no new keyword. This is instantiating an object of type payment sheet. Awesome. In the main thread, this part right here, we're going to finally enable the checkout button after if and only if we've all done all that communication ahead of time. All right, so that's what fetch payment intent does. Okay. Then what we do up at the top here is we set up our little handler. So this is another way of setting up a handler where when we check on the button, instead of creating an IB outlet, we're using actually a little bit of Objective-C code. And the way this works is, again, old school, but we've added a target for the checkout button. And this is kind of setting up an event listener for the most part. It's kind of another way to do it programmatically. And then what we're saying is, okay, so let's add event listener, add target, and the action is going to be using a selector called did tap checkout button. Did tap checkout button is going to activate when you touch up inside the button. And then if you look down here, there is that did tap checkout button. Okay. And then this is really simple. We're going to take the payment sheet that we instantiated, right? That's that part. And you can see here that in order for us to do that, the payment sheet is going to be something that is going to be available to us. So this is right in here, right? So how do we do that? Is there a payment sheet that is global? And you can see, yes, it is. Here inside the view controller, we set up a optional payment sheet object, which we've configured down in here. So we basically said, hey, let's use the payment sheet to store a reference to the new payment sheet object that we instantiate here. Store the reference here, and then we use it back in here. And we present the payment sheet. Remember, we're actually going to instantiate it or blow it up, inflate it, equivalent to Android, right in here. And then there's some options. Switch payment results. If you're completed, we're going to print out your order's completed. If you canceled, we'll say it's canceled. If it failed somehow, we'll say the payment failed. Okay, so those are the objects that we have. It's that simple, my friends. For the user interface, okay? Again, lots of ways to get this. You can even just have a checkout button at this point. I just made it so that my main storyboard had the default, the example code that I've seen in the past. Right, so here you have a cart, a little thing here. I put a couple of elements here. I even put some mock data, and I even made sure that this balances with 13% HST. Okay, now this is wrong. These shouldn't be, this is my bad. Should not be euros. It should be dollars and Canadian. So this should be CAD dollars. See, this is me rushing. And same thing with this one. This should be Canadian dollars. You can actually put a dollar sign in there as well if you really want to. Again, this is just mock-up, for you to look at what this looks like. So this is what this is. I'm going to save this one right now. And then this is my little interface. But the really thing that we care about is this checkout button. The checkout button does everything. The other stuff is just immaterial for this week, right? Again, for the Android side, one button is all you need, just the checkout button. And then the rest you can mock up just like this, okay, if you really want to. Heck, you can even screen capture to get this thing to make it look like this. It doesn't matter. All right, it's just an example. And then let's run it. So if everything goes well, and again, you want to run this with an iPhone 14 Pro Max, you have an example of a little cart that you had. Here's my shopping cart, right? Example, when I click checkout, oh, this is beautiful. Take a look at that. And we can use a sample credit card to check it out. Online, when you go to your stuff here, they give you, this is other things I didn't set up this week, the return URL just in case they want to go off. This on the client side, right? And it kind of goes down here, and they've given you some example credit cards that you can use. So here's something that you can use here. You can also test things and how to work this out. Here's a credit card that's declined. So you can see that they've given you some examples of credit cards that decline and give you some kind of messages so you can test with. So there's nothing that you need to do here in terms of putting in a real credit card or anything like that. Okay? You can see all that's really, really great here is you can enable Apple Pay. You can enable all kinds of stuff. I haven't done any of that stuff right now. We're going to take it easy for this week. I just want you to do this part. Okay? So I'm using this credit card here, 4242. Right, so I'm going to grab this right here. So I'm just going to grab this 424242, right? And then I'm going to go back to here and I'm going to go to my credit card and I'm going to paste it in. So you can see I've got my 4242. It recognizes it as a Visa. And here I'm going to put in, something like, 1134, right? And my CCV is going to be, 666. Why not? It's going to ask me for my postal code. It says Canada, but I can select any country. There's a lot of other countries available here. I'm going to put my postal code M9M. I'm making this up. 1C8, right? And then notice it says pay CA999. That came from my backend. So the way this would work is when I click the checkout button, it's going to connect to my backend. Or actually when I come here, for the first time, I'm in the checkout screen. Let's say if I was there, I've already connected to my backend. It already knows that I'm doing this kind of stuff. And now it's a matter of me making this transaction secure. So if I click on pay 999, you can see it's processing the transaction. And then you get this little green checkbox temporarily that says everything is great. And then if I check out what this looks like, you can see that it gives me some information. This is your order is confirmed. And that, for the most part, is what I want you to demonstrate. I want you to demonstrate this, that you can do this. It gives you a lot of other information here that you don't need. But again, I want you to confirm that you can do that. Okay, and that's the app for this week. The little app for Stripe. And I would have done this morning. Again, I apologize, but I had a bit of an emergency. Okay, so then what do you do then for the Android side? Pretty simple. Let's back it up. So we chose iOS, right? Way up here. Let's choose Android. Okay. Again, you can see it's almost identical. And as we scroll down, it talks about how to do the back end. Now here's where it's slightly different. We're using our Gradle as a package manager to build everything else. So this is where you would add this stuff to Gradle. It's going to add all the dependencies in there, just like we did on the iOS side. Then you're going to enable the payment methods just like we showed you, whatever payment methods you want. And as you scroll down, you're going to choose your server. The server, you have nothing to do. It's already been done for you. So this part's been done on the server side. Okay, and then you're going to collect payment details. All right, so here is where it's slightly different. Now here is showing Kotlin, which is what you want to use, but you can also use Java if you really feel like it. It's fine. Whatever you want to do here. And it basically says initialize a payment sheet instance inside the onCrate of your checkout activity. So you need a checkout activity. All right, the checkout activity is going to have one button at least, checkout. Okay, that's all it needs. And what you want to do here is exactly the same thing, right? Where you have your payment sheet information here on payment sheet results, and then notice it says on payment sheet results is implemented in the next steps. Okay. So notice here that it's doing your import statement, it says next, fetch the payment intent client secret, ephemeral key, and secret. Now, I'm not using the ephemeral key. Ephemeral key is if I wanted to keep a client. I'm also not using the customer ID, right? Again, what you could do is you could feed what I already gave you on the iOS side on Android and say, on ChatGPT and say, I want this on Android, right? And then compare it with this code. But for the most part, it's exactly the same. So this is the checkout activity, and all they're showing you here is the changes that have happened, right? So here's my back-end endpoint payment sheet, right? In our case, it'd be payment. That's the back-end payment, right? And then your back-end endpoint would be, in our case, localhost 3000, right, /payment. So it should work for you. And then we check to see if the result's success. I don't need the ephemeral key. I don't care about that. As an example, in fact, I probably don't need this entire block for the customer configuration because we're not using a customer that's returning in our case. You can see that that's the case. And then finally, we get the publishable key that we need to use. That we do. And then basically we create a function on payment sheet results. And then you can see that they've added that in there in the last part, which is identical for the most part to everything you've already done on iOS. Guys, I don't think this is too crazy to do, and I think it's pretty easy to get going, but you need to test it and demonstrate it. That's the part that you need to work on. All right, I would normally ask, do you have any questions? But it's just me. And it's not fault of yours in this case. So this is what I want you guys to do. Again, reach out to me if you have any issues this week with it. I don't think there's going to be issues with this thing. Again, this is due Sunday at midnight. Lots of time to get this done. And lots of fun. I think it's a great opportunity for you to set up Stripe because it's a very popular gateway that you and your team members can use for your project that you're setting up this semester. All right, guys, that's it for me. I'll leave you. Just parting thoughts. Next week, again, we'll do more of this. There shouldn't be any issues. So I'll be here at my regular time, which is 8 a.m. on a Monday. We'll continue with Stripe. What I intend to do next week is map this out a little bit. Let's try and do an actual product example where maybe we have a product list and I want to add a couple things to my cart. How does that look like? Let's set up a shopping cart. Can we do that? Something like that next week. And then actually do a transaction, right? So again, it'll be a test transaction, but we'll try and do it so it's more of a robust example compared to what we're doing here. Here, we're just set up this week. Next week, we'll do more of the work. Okay? And that's it for me this week, guys. Thank you so much, and I appreciate all your patience and and again, apologize for the inconvenience. If this caused you an inconvenience, I know you guys plan things very succinctly. You guys are very busy people. So you should still have a lot of time between now and Sunday to get this done. Guys, thank you so much, and thank you. Good luck.